Hello and welcome. We are so excited to welcome you to Living Cities Earth experience. Please enjoy the next few minutes, and we hope that this video and the ideas from our speakers will change your life to the better. Listen carefully. What particularly talks to you? What might have a chance to change your life and lives of people around you? Also, life of your place and our planet. We believe that you, the leaders of positive change, are those who define the future. So let's work together. And thank you for coming. All right. As we are coming back together for our next session, it has a beautiful name. So 7 topics, 7 themes of a city which is fully alive. And we will explore the dimensions of a community, infrastructure, of course, learning and education ecosystems, impact culture, and several others. And I would like to introduce several of our distinguished speakers. And Lorna McDowell, thank you very much for joining us from, I guess, Northern Europe. Are you in Ireland or in which part of this?
I'm calling from Galway in the west of Ireland today, but I live between London and the west of Ireland. So
okay, well, Lorna,
two extremes.
Well, welcome to our discussion. And a second gentleman, also from the United Kingdom, so a neighbor in a way, is Guy Eames, and Guy will be speaking first because he will have to leave for his family reasons. A bit later, I would like to welcome Guy as well. Surprisingly, we have a third person who resides currently in Scotland, so again, not too far away, with the roots to South Africa, and it's Ferial Puran. Ferial, good to see you again. And Alexander Laszlo will join us shortly from Buenos Aires. Alexander is one of the co-hosts and one of the amazing speakers who is sharing his wisdom in many of our sessions because he's so intricately involved in building our LC ecosystem. And Tim Olsen, with very diverse geographic sort of life experiences, is currently in South Africa. So I'm in Northern America, so we are all over our small planet, our spaceship Earth. And as we move into the next topic, we will explore some particular dimensions of the city experience. And of course, each one of us has more in-depth understanding of some areas. And I would like to start maybe with Guy. Guy, if you could quickly share within 30 seconds, what are your key interests in life? And then how do you see them contributing, I mean, those areas to sort of happy, flourishing, happy, thriving, sustainable cities? So, Guy, if you could go first, maybe overall for 3-5 minutes, and then we'll pass it on to Lorna, and we'll pick it up from Lorna.
Sure. Thank you very much, Lev, and thank you for organizing this session. It's wonderful to be here with so many fantastic experts from all around the world. Happy cities, that's certainly something that is very high on my wish list or my aims in life. I think if you have a happy city with happy people living there, then a lot of the social problems and the other problems in society will disappear. My particular area of interest that I work in professionally is in sustainability and in building a sustainable built environment. I think that if there are so many technologies, solutions out there today to build green buildings, green infrastructure, sustainable infrastructure for a town or a city. Without this infrastructure, it's very difficult to make an efficient economy, to keep people happy and healthy, and to give hope for the future. That's my personal view of things. I think it's an important element of having a happy city. So I've been working for the last 15 years with a global community of green builders. There are green building councils in most countries in the world. And we bring together engineers, architects, developers, inventors, city planners, all sorts of other people, health experts, and with the aim of creating what we call green or sustainable buildings or sustainable infrastructure. For some people who are not very keen on sort of on the green agenda, they might think that that sounds rather sort of crazy, but on that, and indeed in many countries 10, 15 years ago, there was a lot of resistance to the idea, especially in Eastern Europe, of what are we talking about, these green buildings? Why would you need them? They're presumably going to be very expensive, etc. But in reality, green buildings throughout their life cycle can be about half the cost of a regular building, because most of the cost in the building's life cycle is the energy and which is used to power the building. And the other sort of major economic arguments, which most people seem to ignore when they're talking about all these solar panels and things on the roof, which are obviously going to be too expensive and not going to work. One of the major economic influences or impacts of green buildings is the productivity of people who are working in those buildings. I'm sure we've all worked in buildings which are uninspiring, which make us feel sick, tired, and just want to leave the company or not work there. And we've also spent time in buildings which inspire us with natural light, with wonderful air, wonderful microclimates, with green walls inside, with living trees and plants, and wonderful acoustics. And that type of environment helps people interact. It brings out the best in people. And the same is actually true even for accommodation, for housing, residential places. There have been scientific studies which have shown that people even living within the same apartment block, those who have views outside with wonderful parks and green space out there, and with the right, where the sun comes up and goes down and they get enough sunlight, compared to the other side of the building, there are much better social relationships, families stay together, children study better, people are healthier. And this is such a sort of simple building physics, simple sort of scientifically proven case, that it would be crazy not to build cities out of these type of using these type of solutions with local materials, with biodynamic lighting, with wonderful microclimates, working together to bring nature inside the buildings. So as you can hear, that's my passion. That's one of the things that I've been working on for the last 15 years, since I got a master's in that in De Montfort University in Leicester. And I think that I've managed to inspire people. Many people have inspired me as well, wonderful architects and specialists. And one of the key things is to bring all these people together, because a lot of the people who are experts in that field, they live in sort of silos. They're just talking about their one part of the building. Marketing people don't speak to, who are doing the communications, don't speak with engineers, don't speak with the finance people. And in the green building world, it's a question of bringing everybody together, bringing in key pieces of new infrastructure. You can't have divided waste if you don't have the space to have the various bins, for example. It's just a fact, yeah. Or you can't have an efficient building if it's just been designed completely wrongly, etc. So that's my area of interest, and I think that that's a key element for any happy city, is to have a sustainable built environment. And it doesn't always cost a huge amount of money. I know Tim's nodding there. I've also worked with companies who have brought in sustainable built environments to the poorest African towns, which have cost peanuts, using local materials instead of a lot of the so-called sort of high-tech, which we usually think of when we're thinking of green buildings or sustainable buildings. So thanks very much. Interesting to hear now all the other 6 elements. I'm sure there are actually many more than 6, but 7 is a wonderful number. It's a lucky number, and looking forward to listening to some of the other rest of my colleagues here, Alexander Laszlo particularly, and Lorna as well from Ireland. Yeah, over to you guys.
Guy, thank you very much. We have a small trick. The last theme is the integral development, and because integral development includes everything, so all of the other subjects are also there. But thank you very much for your inspiring sort of introduction. And you are dealing with one of the most difficult, in a way, areas of city existence, because built environments are very difficult to change. I mean, you can change 1 building, 10 buildings, but if you have thousands of buildings in a city and other types of infrastructure, it's very expensive. I know, talking again to the mayors, it's their really second largest headache. So after the elections, the second one is how to deal with all the legacy infrastructure which needs to be taken care of, but there are no funding for this, right? So those
it's
also
true, but often things like energy efficiency in buildings are the most lowest hanging fruit to be invested in. It's one of the most boring topics in the world, insulating your loft or putting in better windows and things, but it's actually one of the lowest hanging fruits for investors to invest in. Often you can get your money back in a couple of years if you do it correctly. Yeah, if you don't just go for some high-tech solutions.
Absolutely, and that's why it's so important to talk about it, because most people just don't know about it. As I said, I'm 49 years old, and I heard for the first time in my life about sustainable development only 5 years ago. At least before, the message didn't go through my filters, maybe. But it's amazing with living in many sort of cities which are considered to be like Amsterdam and New York and some others, some of the pioneers in sustainable development. But I'm just saying that it's amazing how long it takes to get the message across. So, Guy, thank you and your colleagues for really doing all this amazing job.
My pleasure.
Global scale. And going to the second sort of element we want to discuss today is the community. And I would like to ask Lorna to speak first about it, but then if other colleagues like Tim and Ferial for sure, and Alexandra actually, if we want to share also our ideas about community, let's explore why community is so critically important. And I know that we mentioned it, of course, the connection community many times over the last couple of days. And Lorna brings a very special perspective. She's a founder and CEO of X Energy, and it's a company with, I would say, global presence. And we are planning to work also on some initiatives with on a planetary scale. And Lorna works with organizations and communities, nonprofits. Lorna, how do you feel and how do you see it from your experience? Why community is so important to create a happy environment on a city scale as well as within the organizations, perhaps?
Thanks for the introduction, Lev. It's a pleasure to be here. So, human beings are tribe animals. We do everything in tribes, and we are happiest with that sense of belonging. So, Guy, you mentioned the word productivity and the people that live in the buildings, and so the planet. We are the humans are part of the biodiversity of the planet. So we really need to understand how we exist on this planet. So I became interested in deep change through my own journey of understanding community. And I grew up in a family that was very global and international, where we were all quite distant from one another. So yeah, I've made my own community as a child by people that I felt naturally connected to. And I've never really thought an awful lot about that until I got older and started working in organizations. Became really interested in international culture and why certain cultures are how they are, and that was in the context of business. And I was working in the private sector at the time, in the technology industry, at a time when innovation was happening very fast. It was very exciting because it was also new, but there was also quite a considerable impact on the people that hadn't been considered. So it was a community that was generating new communities, but the actual being of the people was suffering. And that's one reason why I stepped out of the tech industry and I moved to the west of Ireland on a very intuitive whim. I won't bore you with my own story, but the point of it is that by moving to Ireland, I actually really came back into touch with myself and nature. And it was the experience of stepping out of myself which led me on a different journey. So my career then went on to working in psychology, and I found my way back into working with organizations. So, as I said, we exist in organizations, we exist in teams, we exist in families, and that's probably one of the biggest learnings of life, is how we learn to be with one another. And deep and broad change. And I've been listening a lot for the last 24 hours about, the need to connect up communities, the need to connect dots, not to work in isolation, and how do we scale? Well, it's all about connecting communities and to connect. So it's very easy sometimes to connect to people that think like each other because we make each other feel even better. But it's harder to really connect with those that we are not like, and to recognize that we need them, Not only that, that we need them, but, they actually represent something about ourselves we are totally not in touch with. And that is hard work. So my work today is very much around working with leaders and organizations to find their way through that. And I would say that, there is actually a desire and a will to bring about change. I mean, when you talk about the logic of sustainability, when you talk about the logic of sustaining the planet, there are very few people that would disagree with that. But the difficulty is finding one's own identity, will and way through that. And we absolutely need each other to do that. We need sectors to come together. So apart from my work at Zenergy, I founded something called the World Exchange Foundation, which is about multi-stakeholder partnership, which is linked to number 17 of the sustainability goals. And, these multi-stakeholder partnerships will only succeed if we learn how to collaborate and be with our difference. And it is about messiness. It's about exploration. People are not taught how to get on with their difference. So we need massive upskilling and learning around how to collaborate. And I'm not talking about a little bit of teamwork. I'm talking about really facing the other and releasing judgment and, really, being with that discomfort. And most people find that pretty tough. So we have to make that absolutely compelling, not just because we have to, but because we want to. And I think, somebody else said this morning around, we need to, we've got to create a vision of the future. We've got to move out of survival talk, which I'm not negating that for 1 minute. However, we've got to really open up the imagination and help people discover, that bigger sense of the future. It's something that people will buy into, really thinking of redesigning things. So I think, I actually have huge hope because I do believe that fundamentally people want to do that. But we have to get over this thing about how we work with each other. And as somebody said yesterday, love has no competition. What would love do? Well, we don't work from a place of competition. We work from a place of togetherness. So, that's why I think communities are important. We've got to join up the dots. We've got to find out how to work with each other and find ourselves in all of that. And remember, it's not just about the ego of what's going to happen today. It's for our future generations. So that keeps me going.
Thank you very much, Lorna. Colleagues, I invite you, if you want to share some of your thoughts on the importance of community and how to create communities in our cities. Welcome. Who would like to go first?
Okay, I'll go. I'll pick up from what Lorna said, because absolutely I'm with Lorna in the sense that half of our big challenge is that we don't know how to work together, right? And we don't know how to navigate and negotiate and understand that we are coming at, I think we very often want a similar outcome, but we're coming at whatever the challenge is from a different perspective, because our entire kind of development as a human, where I come from, my education, the fact that I'm a female, all of that, all of my various parts of my journey would have shaped how I'm viewing the world. So this is some of the stuff we teach in the courses that we do, is that we must earn the emotional currency to buy these visas to each other's worlds and actually be able to see someone else's perspective, and of course we will never be in that person's shoes, right? Because they're a different human. And that's what also makes it beautiful. That's what makes the diversity so beautiful, because they're going to bring in that other beautiful aspect of what I'm not seeing, but allowing myself to see it a little bit from their perspective, just helps me to kind of adjust my perspective enough so that I'm able to work with them, and not against them, and not see that they're trying to, that competition that we talk about. So there's a part of competition, I think, that's good, that competition that pushes us to kind of develop and move forward and create something better. But then there's the part of it where it's where we're in competition, you know, in the sense of we're always looking for what the other person's not doing right and that kind of thing. But it's not a case of wrong and right. And I think this is the thing in community, in building that community, the moment that we understand there's this massive part of building that community where empathy, for example, is required. Unless you understand the stories, this is why storytelling is so beautiful. So I would say, as we build communities, we have to tell stories to one another, because when we tell our stories and we start to share, you're not just looking at a brown woman with curly hair all of a sudden, you're looking at like the lens from which I'm coming at life, you know, and that does help understand. And I've seen this in rooms all across the world where I have worked, and we start to tell stories and it changes, because it's like, oh my God, I didn't know, you know, I didn't realize, you know, you have these kind of aha moments. And I think more of that is needed. We need to know more about each other, countries, nations, you know, talk about some very infamous and significant people like Hitler. There was a story, you know, Hitler just didn't happen. There was a story. And so maybe even as we understand these stories, we can also intervene into perhaps changing the narratives of some of those stories that perhaps are heading towards creating negative impact within those communities. So I think that, yeah, I would add that to community building if we can. And that goes with, for me, it's about, so it's going to interlace with building leadership, right? So we do see leadership very often as, you know, certain people that are, you know, kind of taking positions of leadership, but I really see leadership as all of us being leaders, and we're leaders in different capacities. So some of us are maybe just leading our own lives, but that's still really important, you know. So if we could see that in every capacity that we find ourselves leading, that there are tools that are necessary to lead effectively, and it would bring us to our education. And I would say in cities, really important for us to invest in that. I think I said it yesterday, we've invested quite a lot in our IQ. And in Scotland, that has been very, very, you'd see that Scottish people just 100 years ago, you know, we were kind of on the streets doing crazy things, and because we weren't educated, right? And so all of a sudden we invested in that IQ education, and look at Scotland today, one of the leading nations in the world. So again, produce some of the best innovators, and so it was that shift that we made. So I think we're just at that next point of making the shift to invest in the EQ, making the shift to saying there's more to understanding ourselves as humans and our interrelationships with everything around us, which is important to us because we are in a symbiotic kind of relationship with other beings. So this is necessary to understand that intra-beingness that Alexander talked about earlier as well. And then, of course, coming at that with an understanding of firstly who we are, but also who others are, and what they need and what we need, so that we can help each other have that freedom of expressing ourselves within cities and within wherever we're living, really. So I'd add that to this.
Wow, how inspiring! I'm just writing down your words, and it's really. I agree so much that the development of EQ, it came about in the corporate environment like 20, 25, 30 years ago, but for many social contexts, it's still at a very early stage in many countries. So people are still dealing the way they know how to deal, but in many cases it's trauma-based. It's very ineffective and not so much in synchrony with each other, not even in harmony. And so, Alexander, what's your take on building communities? Why is it important, and how to do it?
Well, I love what Farah has just been saying. Also, it brings to the fore the need, and it connects with what Lorna was saying. Frankly, again, we're kind of speaking a common language here, all of us. It's no surprise. This is what we have been kind of invited here to share. And I think diversity is key, because otherwise, as we say, we're preaching to the choir. As Lorna was talking about, how do we create environments where we are accepting and challenged in a way. We were talking yesterday about the fact that if we're looking just for cities where everything is the utopia, and we want to create just happiness and be in those states, then we're not looking at the full rose garden with the roses complete. We're just looking at the flowering part of the rose, but not the stems. We need the whole rose garden. There's medicine, as in the indigenous perspective, there's medicine in all of that. And indeed, if we only focus on part of it, we are unbalanced. We can't take only the good, what we perceive to be the good. And there's always what we perceive, right? And this is, I think, both Lorna and Ferial were talking to that. How do we have this framing that allows us to be in empathy? So my call here for these different points is to think about how cities can cultivate and activate empathy. So what are those spaces, places that invite us to connect, but to connect not just as thinking, conscious beings, but as sentient, feeling beings. And this combines things that what Guy was saying earlier on. I mean, I think Guy was talking about kind of what I see as the hard skills, the built environment. And Ferial was talking, I think, about the soft skills, the relational environment. Lorna was talking about kind of both in that frame. How do we have, this is the domain of what's called socio-technical systems approach. And socio-technical systems seek the joint optimization. When it was developed in the Tavistock Institute by Emery and Trist in the 1960s, it was called the 3 M's: man, machine, and management. Okay, but now we can reframe that and see it in a different light, but it still is looking at those relational domains. And I'm going to put here into our chat a link to where something you were talking about, Lev. These are the different kind of leverage points, and Donella Meadows has a very classical article there on places to intervene in a system, and many people are familiar with this. But she talks about how, I think Lorna touched on this as well, the easiest places, and so did Guy, the easiest places to intervene are the built environment, in the sense that you can construct something, you can do a technological fix, you can provide a living space that allows people to have more sunshine, etc. The kind of things Guy was talking about. Cool. The hardest parts on her 9 dimensions of places to intervene in the system are the places where we have to change mindsets, not just the overall frameworks and the goals of the system, but actually the mindsets of how do we engage with ourselves and with each other. And I would call it more the heart set. So there are these things: the skill set, the mindset, and the heart set. And none of these are set. Frankly, they're all in dynamics. But how do we include all of those? And so for me, to be able to create these, to focus on how do we jointly optimize those dimensions that are the built environment and the relational environment. And this then creates common unity or community. Right? So again, it's about fostering. And I think there's no algorithm for this. I think this is what we've been talking about here as well. There's not like, oh, you build this kind of building, it's done. Everybody's going to be relating and in thriving engagement with life and with each other and so on. No. So it is something that we live into. And as Tim said earlier, different cities have different energies. So what's going to be a thriving combination of the built environment, the relational environment, and the interactive between those things and nature, it's going to be different in different cities, different cultures, different societies. So it means listening with heart, something Ferial has been insisting on very deeply. And this, I think, is about empathy. How do we create cities of empathy? I'll pass it back to you, Lev.
Wow. I'm looking at each one of us as we speak and listen to each other, and I realize that we are developing and, of course, manifesting this quality of empathic listening to each other, and that's the best when we can sort of set an example, right? And I remember in this or maybe prior session, we had a moment of silence at some point. And initially I was a little bit uncomfortable. Maybe I asked a question and everybody was silent. But then I realized, well, it's our heart or our sort of intuition, all of our systems actually trying to find the best way, try to feel ourselves in this situation, to sort of get a scan of how other people are manifesting and how they're feeling. And only then, I think Ferial started to speak. And this moment of silence really reminded me that we need moments of silence in our interactions, in our families, organizations, and cities as well, because that's when we connect on a non-verbal, non-cognitive sort of level. Completing with the topic of community, I invite Tim if he wants to share something, and I will have a couple of thoughts as well. So Tim, would you like to join in on the community?
Yeah, sure. So there's so many interesting threads and topics. I thought it was really interesting what Guy started talking about, how you can see how people's lives play out differently depending on the structure they live in. You know, sunlight, energy, how that affects productivity, and all the way through the conversations to Alexander and this, I think, used in this notion of safe spaces within the city. Yeah, it's just so there's some new ideas that struck me living in Cape Town that there's for the majority of the population, I think probably live, you know, on dirt floors under tin roofs without their own toilet, you know, so just going out to nobody goes out to the toilet at night because it's just too dangerous. And community is often broken down because there's, you know, it's turf war. There's like and leaders, the young leaders, especially the males, are sucked up by the gangs. You know, if you show potential, you can become, you know, you can work your way up in the ranks and become a gang leader. You know, and that's how you get status, and there's lots of, or decent, relatively a lot of money given how poor people are in these places. And so most communities are controlled by gangs and the mafias. Even like the housing projects are kind of owned and controlled by the mafia, and to a great degree that's how the governments work here. Like there's so much money is disappearing into the private pockets of organized crime, which is quite integrated with the political system. And so there is this massive force that is constantly breaking down community in every time the flower of community pops up, there's a boot to stomp on it, you know. And I think maybe one start is those, if safe spaces existed, that would give people and children and adults just a place where they can breathe. Because as most of my Cape Town friends have said when they've been in Europe, it's been like, it's so strange that even if I have a friend who's like severely traumatized and gets panic attacked if she's on a train, but when she went to Europe, she lives in Germany now, when she went to Europe, she was like, it was amazing because all of a sudden you weren't looking over your shoulder constantly. You could sit on a train at night and not have a freak out because it was just a safer space. It was a safer city. So I think that is I think we, as most of us have pointed out, that we seek to create community. And the only reason when we fail to create community is if there's a system in place to actively stop us from reaching out to each other in various ways. So it's definitely there's and the way that things have rolled out in Cape Town in my case, so that you perpetuated the poverty, and now you have taxi ranks. So these are like the small buses that drive people around from townships or other like less fortunate socioeconomical areas into town, and they pay like, you know, some of them pay half their wage just in transport costs to get in and out of town, which takes maybe an hour, you know, which is an absurd amount of money to pay, but they have no choice. And when they try to pull in, the cities every now and then tries to pull in bus lines, but the buses get shot at because the taxis run by gangsters who don't want the competition. So you have all these crazy things that are breaking up community. But at the same time, there are people who want to create community. So if one could start by creating the spaces and giving the people who could be the community leaders options, supporting not individuals, but groups of individuals so they can create a community. So one of the projects we're working on in Coder, or the altruistic wallet, is this notion, well, how can we more effectively give resources from one person organization to a group of people and not go through the administration where most of the money will disappear. You know, so give directly. But if you give directly to one person, you know, they don't want to tell anybody else about this because this is now their meal ticket. But if you could give to, say, well, you need a new roof, well, find 4 other people that need new roofs, and together you can apply. And then you have we'll fund 5 new roofs as a way to now. So that could be another way to sort of create community. So people now have to cooperate, otherwise they won't get a new roof. But they'd have to cooperate anyway to rebuild. So maybe these are the ways to go. I don't actually know. I suspect it's going to take a generation or more to heal this level of trauma. But we seek community. This is what we do. And so for us, maybe it's what we can do is, what we should focus on is facilitate the potential for community, because it doesn't really exist here in some spaces. So creating that potential for community, and then we see what emerges over time.
Tim, it was so enlightening to listen to your thoughts, because I also realized, of course, that I'm so privileged in all the countries where I lived. I just never had, I mean, of course, there is some type of crime activity everywhere, for sure. I even watch those movies from Guy Ritchie, if you know him, Guy Ritchie, the British director. there is lots of crime in his movies, but in all the countries where I lived, studied, worked, etc., I never had any of those issues. So I understand, like me, right? But many people do have them. And but I want to share just a couple of thoughts on the community, and I will focus on a very specific part of it. There are many different types of communities, but I want to focus on action communities. So in the city, there are so many different ways people organize their life to share interests, right, to take care of their places. But I want to talk about communities which I consider to be the driving force behind city change. And those are communities of intentional people who have capacity, whether it's intellectual or hard capacity, right, or interrelational capacity, to really connect, to build something which is not possible to do when we are separate. So people understand cognitively or intuitively that there is such a thing as collective intelligence, which doesn't exist until we start communicating. And there is such a thing as collective action, which is very different from actions of separate individuals. And specifically on a city level, to talk about happy cities, we discovered that until we sit in our sort of kitchens or in our sort of local individual small gardens, in our country houses, and we don't communicate, don't create common vision, don't subscribe to common action, we're almost invisible to many larger actors. So be it large companies or local government or national government, while we're alone, we're pretty much the statistical errors, right? Negligent parts of this overall existence. So, and it's not that because they don't want to pay attention, but it's impossible to pay attention to subjects which are so much smaller than you are in terms of size and complexity. So to be able to influence life on a city level in a meaningful way, we need to come together. To come together, we need to have some catalysts, right? Be some events or some people, I call them leaders of positive change, who are able to bring the attention of people then to create collaboration structures. As you said, we need some spaces, whether material or sort of online. And when people come together, there is a certain emergent element of their collective intelligence when they could come up with ideas which have power to change things. And then when they engage into collective action, and for example, again, from our very practical experience, when we have 100 active leaders coming together, they could affect any issue on a city or even regional level. But until they do, they are not visible by the different authorities. So from this perspective, whatever the situation, it could be a very wealthy city like Amsterdam, or sort of poor like some cities in South Asia, for example, or maybe other regions as well. It's very important, again, to start with one individual, and we're moving into the subject of leadership, who is able to bring the second person on board, right? Together they start building this nucleus, the core group, which is interested in making some sort of change on a local level. And around them, then the whole movement could start. And very often people like this really change the quality of life on a city level, and then move to the regional and the country level. And so the subject of leadership, personal leadership, as well as collective leadership, is very, I think, pertinent to creating happy cities, because if there are no leaders who take responsibility, the change, of course, will happen, but we don't know what kind of change. It could be positive change, negative change. So we need intentional leaders, intentional communities who take responsibility and drive this change. It will never be the same way as we envision in the very beginning, right? So the circumstances will affect us, but it's creating this network of leaders who also support each other through inspiration, through toolbox, as Alexander mentioned, skill set, heart set, and mindset. So I invite you to please share your thoughts, and maybe it will be our last round in this section. Who are the leaders who create happy cities? What qualities they are, and how can we sort of develop or manifest more of those positive change leaders in the cities around the world? Alexander, I see you have a hand. The floor is yours.
I got the floor, and I make one last post here. Put a couple of things into the chat, lower my hand. And I like the idea of collective action. I like to think of it in relationship to collective intelligence, something that Lorna also touched on, with the following flow that, whoop, my hand is still up, sorry. There. That the precursor to collective intelligence is connective intelligence. And connective intelligence is about knowing with whom to connect, with what resources to connect it to nature, with what information as well to connect, because you can have faulty information, etc. With what feelings to connect. Oh, that's connective intelligence, right? Open hearts, and so on. That can lead to the collective intelligence, which is the connective intelligence in action. That's when you start to build like that beautiful image we have of living cities, Earth, with all of the dots around the world, connecting the dots. That's connecting the dots, but the dots are of, when they're put into action, then you start to get the collective intelligence. But that's not the end goal. The end goal, hopefully, will lead to the next stage of collective wisdom, where you can share the intelligence in ways that build constructive and life-affirming, future-creating, and opportunity-increasing outcomes. So that can lead to collective creativity, where people get enthused, where they ignite life. A nod to Ferial. Yes. This is, that's where you get to collective creativity. And that, when it's manifest, can bring in collective action. But for me, it's not starting with the collective action. It starts with the connective intelligence, which can lead to that. And I put also another little flow there that for me, it also starts with synchronicity, which is where we are open to possibility. You can't create synchronicities, but you can be open to them. So you see them, you see where we're connected, you see potentials for thrivability. And then you say, wow, look at how we could be engaged. And that leads to conscious alignment, which is syntony, right? Trying to find those harmony points where we can actually build on each other and so on. That's the syntony. And bringing that into manifest action is synergy. Frankly, between synchronicity, syntony, and synergy, there's a lot of sin. but that's a lot of fun, and that's where we go. All right, I'm done.
Lorna, and then Eric, and then Ferial. Thank you.
And I just wanted to add a perspective here around the role of organisations in community change as well. Excuse me, there's a bit of building work going on in my background, so I hope it's not interfering too much. So there's actually been quite a lot of progress, I think, in the last couple of years related to the shift in legislation around ESG. And whilst that's very much an acronym, and a lot of people don't even know what that stands for, environmental and social governance, and there has been perhaps more attention on the E side, which has been criticised as being associated with greenwashing in corporate land. There is, what I've observed, certainly in these organisations that I've been involved with, a real desire to figure out what to do. Now, not everybody would be aware of it, but certainly in the C-suite and at senior level, they are very much aware of it, because the whole of the financial underbelly of our economic system is now very much being influenced by that. So when we're talking about drivers and how do we connect things together, it's important to also look at what is happening already, and the speed at which our things are going is much faster than it was. It can still go faster, and there is a lot to do. But I think it's just want to kind of say the importance of recognising that the will is there. What people are finding is the way, and on a very practical level in organisations, that's often related to something like time. What gets measured. So what gets managed is what gets measured. And so if it is not in the agenda or the business plan of an organisation to have their staff get involved in a community activity or thinking more widely, then it's very hard for individuals to bring their influence, or to give the time. But what's happening now is that there's the Great Resignation. There's many forces and factors in which people are demanding something different. But I'm as I said before, I'm really positive. Over 80% of CEOs in most surveys are saying that they are actually actively thinking about how to change their organisations. And there is a feeling and understanding if they don't start moving fast, there is a risk of getting left behind, and they are not going to be able to hire people. They are not going to get customers. And all of this, and also responsibility for their supply chains, is going to be far greater in the next couple of years. What I'm saying here is that these are factors which are really important for businesses to sustain their existence and their rationale. And these organisations employ loads of people who keep communities going. So it is the organisations that are providing a lot of the, financial resilience of cities and well-being. And we are seeing shifts in how organisations are being led. So I do see change happening. It is slow. There is a lot more to do, but it comes back down to, can we reimagine a different way of doing things? Can we create new conditions? When we create spaces, it's multi-stakeholder partnerships, and it's also within organisations for teams and leaders to create spaces for different thinking, not to chastise somebody if they make a mistake. Only in this way will we create an environment and conditions for people to completely reimagine and to engage differently right across their value chain, and discover that being a better global citizen means you have a much better business. And it's much better thriving. So it's really that journey to the win-win, but it is a journey. And so there is stuff happening. The thing is, it's not necessarily seen. It's because it's changing people's minds is an invisible thing. And working with leaders, they don't always reveal what they're thinking right away. In fact, they often reveal it too late. When the shit happens, they might eventually reveal it. But so many people are holding in so much in their heads, and being at the top of an organisation is a very lonely place, because you're holding in a lot. You're holding the whole burden of the organisation. So there's a lot at stake. So it's profoundly interesting, I think, how we create spaces for leaders, as well as for more people to share the leadership in organizations. But I come back to my first point. To be ready for that, we have to be ready for anything. And we have to be ready to also forgive the past. And that's very difficult for some. It's difficult for all of us. We've all got a story. And you don't just forgive it once and it's gone. It comes back and it comes back. You know, that trauma has to be worked with. And trauma is as real in an organization and its history as it is in an individual who has suffered. So, yeah, I have my thoughts.
Very, very important. If we could pass it on to Eric and then to Ferial, and we have about 8 minutes to go in this session time. Eric, you need to switch on your mic.
Thank you. I'm literally, the reason it took me time to unmute myself is that my hands are shaking listening to all of you. I'm very inspired. I'm also very intimidated. I'm going to be honest. I don't consider myself an intellectual. I live in my gut and my heart. And excuse me, I also use the expression my groin, meaning I'm very attached to my passion. And I'm listening to all of you, and I'm like going, this is so good for me, just me personally, to be with such highly intelligent people, because I'm learning so much from you. And my, I think, particular gift on this earth is not knowing and trusting the unknown, and kind of following that mysterious, magical place that is taking all of us at this particular moment in time. And I private message Ferial. I really align with her when she said everyone's a leader. So yes, there are leaders. You know, there's a structure in place in organizations and in governments where we've decided to call those people the leaders, right? But my reality is much different. Everyone's a leader, and we don't know who we're going to influence. We don't know who's going to influence us in the future of this planet. And one of my primary, I think, reasons for is I'm a disruptor. And this whole hierarchical system that we've all been born into isn't working. There needs to be something else. And I don't have the answer to it, but I have the passion and the curiosity and the willingness to work with people like you. And see what it is that we can create that will get us through this mess. So that's basically what I wanted to say.
And I'd like to respond to that, to say, Eric, that's exactly what we need to work with. And I would say the following. Lorna brought up the words reimagine. And very often, and so I get very, very challenging in spaces like this where we do, some of us have had the opportunity to go to universities and study certain aspects of things. But when I look at the word educe, which is where education comes from, then educe means to bring out, right? To develop. So in other words, it isn't about what we already know. What don't we know that we need to know? So sometimes I think that some of the people that we don't look to for answers, we don't look to for solutions, they might be the very people who are sitting with those solutions, because they're not looking at with the same mindset. They're not looking at the cookie cutter thing. They're not looking at the thing that very often our university and our schools have pushed us into a way of thinking. And I mean, some of the greatest minds that I've learned about, I've said we've learned our stuff outside of going to university. So I would like to challenge us that very often we create spaces like these where we invite what people that have, maybe we've got lovely little LinkedIn accolades about ourselves. And I'm saying maybe part of this is also to open up to those, like Eric said, with the passion to contribute, that actually want to, because maybe the universe has linked them into knowledge that is, that we might, that doesn't have the little degree attached to it. So I really want to, because for me, this is a big thing. I've seen this. I think there is something to learn from every human. And I wonder if we need to check our own bias with this, and ask, do we need to open up that space? Because maybe that's part of how we create our living cities and our healthier, more revived places of being in. And that would bring me to the part that I want to contribute, which is about just value exchange. So really, a little while ago, my own heart was so deeply, deeply challenged with the realization that so much, I think almost everything that we're on about, every nested crisis, is rooted in the fact that at some point we started engaging with unjust value exchange. So we often think of injustice, we look at skin color type things, but it is across the board. And we talked about trauma. Our trauma is nested into, has been developing through the fact that we've been exploiting each other and exploiting nature. And I suspect it is out of our fears to protect ourselves and to preserve our lives. But in actual fact, we are doing the exact opposite. So I think that we should start really talking about legislation, so we've gone in there and we've looked at the racial differences and these type of injustices, and we started changing legislation, started changing policies, but maybe we need to go that step further, push the boundaries, because I asked the question, does one human being need X amount more than others? In other words, can our governments regulate some of this? Can our governments, and this is a tough thing, right? It's difficult because it's like the person feels justified. Look, I've worked for this, but really, should there be a threshold of what is enough for a human being to live on, so that the resources, and we're talking about finite resources here, can be shared a lot more equal? And I know this is a hot potato, but I'm saying, are we willing to be brave enough to ask these questions in our cities? Are we willing to challenge our leaders to say, it's time that we reimagine what we've been doing, because what we've been doing clearly hasn't been working. So that's what I would add. I would say, can we be brave enough?
Wow, Ferial, you're inviting us into a new age of bravery and connection and leadership and community. And it, of course, goes to all of us. Thank you very much. We've been together for 1 hour discussing some, not all of those 7 topics. And of course, we haven't explored the whole depths and breadth of integral development on a city scale. And I see that Marilyn Hamilton, author of a book, Integral City, and of many other books on integral city development, is with us. So if I could actually, and I apologize and ask in just 1 minute of our next speaker, who is coming in just a moment. But Marilyn, if you're around and if you could switch on your camera, we would love to hear your short perspective on the integral city development, a term I first heard from you maybe 11, 12 years ago, reading your book actually. And so if you are available, would be great. But in the meanwhile, I will share it myself, being a vivid sort of student. So when we talk about, oh, Marilyn is here, so I better shut up. Marilyn, very good to see you. You are a keynote speaker later today. But because we're talking about many things which are included in integral city development, if you could share just 1 minute perspective, perhaps, for people who have not heard about it, right, who might be listening to us online or will be watching the recording, what does it mean, integral city development, from your perspective? Thank you.
And thank you, Lev. Thank you for the opportunity to listen to all the brilliance here. It's just really like a tsunami of refreshment in listening to your perspectives and your passions, the energy. I would say if I only have a few minutes to talk about Integral City, what does it mean? Well, integral means the whole, holistic, comprehensive, including all. And but for me, it is not just the whole, but it is related to complex adaptive living systems. So you've all been talking and exploring systems. And as we've also heard, the whole relationship of the elements or parts, the organic nature of an integral city is what makes it possible to marry the mind, the heart, the body. And the other aspects that an integral city model embraces is its fractal. And that means that the patterns, where I notice this, so my background has really been working with human systems at all scales. And earlier in my career, I had been working with individual development, then leadership development, then team development, then organizational development, sector development, community development. And somewhere along the line, I went, the patterns of development are all the same. So this was even before I had really learned how to understand systems and speak of them from the research and observations. It was the patterns that struck me. So one of the most commonly used patterns that people who work with teams are very familiar with is form, storm, norm, and perform. And that really is something that we're doing with ourselves. So that when I think about the invocation for the Master Code or Gaia's Code of Care, this is another way to look at integral, that there's different scales that we can care for one another and for ourselves, that love manifests through first ourselves, and then as we're able to care for ourselves, then we have the capacity to care for others. If you've been ill and you are caring for someone, oftentimes you'll find that your capacity to care for another really reduces, and you have to look after yourself to recover the capacity to look after somebody else. So caring for self and caring for others means that we're able to care for our places. And integral cities are places. They include not only all of the individual hold-ons in the city, but all of the collectives. And if any of you have looked at some of my books or the website, you'll see that it took more than one map for me to be able to convey these relationships. In fact, I offer 5 maps in the integral city, but they actually all shape shift from one another. And in fact, one of my colleagues, Peter Vockers, realized a fantasy for me, and that was that he demonstrated the shape shifting. So I think we have that as an opportunity for people to just be able to download it as a little video. So those are some of the ways that one can use integral approaches to the city. But I also don't want to say that it's all just about this mapping, and to really embrace the aliveness that you started talking about some time ago, because without the aliveness of the city, doesn't matter how many maps we have, we're not going to feel the connection that we have with each other. I know that we're going to listen to Jude Currivan in a little while, and she talks about thinking cosmically and feeling globally and acting locally. And each one of those is kind of holographic, so that as an individual or as a collective, we can think and feel and act together. So those kinds of experiences of an integral city allow us to appreciate that it is, in fact, what I came to realize. It is a whole living system of itself. I call it the human hive. I've learned through biomimicry to see it through the lenses of the bees. And this is how thinking and being and acting, co-creating, relating with one another is something I can actually see when I look at the bees and why I think that it is really an honor to think of cities as human hives in their complex, evolutionary, developmental, integral ways of being. So there's a little short comment.
Marion, thank you for completing our session. And it was a very rich discussion coming again from all parts of our planet. Wow, you have made it. You just watched amazing insights from experts of Living Cities Earth ecosystem. We welcome you to the Living Cities Earth experience and hope that we are going for a long ride as we take care of ourselves, our communities, our cities, and our planet. Thank you and welcome.